Central Casting by Chris Penycate. Performed by Roger Worrod. Directed by Chris Penycate and Roger Worrod. Yes, I've seen your advertisements in the papers. Hero, 6'5", 38-inch chest, must like reptiles. Princess, beautiful, must be ready to go naked. And so on. I don't do it like that. I go round to Central Casting and say, Bert, the Honourable Albert Fotherby Soames, but don't hold that against him. He dumped the author who wrote him many years ago. And I only go round when he's on duty, because he cares about his characters and matches them to writers by feel, not computer analysis. I say, Bert, who've you got that really wants to be written? His room was lined with loaded bookshelves and a computer screen rising from the table at which he was seated, but he made no move to retrieve information from either. Another room might have filing cabinets, or spinning brass gears, or even chain demons, whatever symbol might appeal to that particular scribe or researcher. Perhaps the books were mere props, but the place felt right and smelt right for its occupant. The light couldn't have really been coming through those high-set square-leaded windows, for the room was in no way gloomy, but gave the impression it was. A comfortable place, dark wood and cloth, none of the stainless steel and plastic or magic and weirdness favoured by other agents. I don't know if I've got anyone desperate enough to get mixed up with your crazy plots. He always says that, but he always comes through. What's the setting this time? Near future, very Big Brother, but supernatural elements, so you don't insist on humans. How about a lesbian kung fu vampire? Sounds promising. What's her name? And is she beautiful? He chuckled. I know better than to offer that to you. You wouldn't take a beautiful one if she stripped down and gave you a blowjob at the end of each chapter. You're right. I don't write stories like that. At least, I haven't up till now. And remember the last beautiful one you sent me? She spent so much time with soap and hairbrush, we were barely making 15 miles a day. If I hadn't dropped her off in that inn in Chapter 3 and replaced her with the landlord's dumpy daughter, glaciation would have set in before we completed the quest. And the new girl could snare, skin and cook rabbits, and had a wicked sense of humour. When we collected your protégée in Chapter 11, she was furious at having missed the action, and came back here and joined a barbarian novel, where even charging into battle wearing high-heeled boots, a chainmail skirt and nipple rings didn't outweigh the advantage that she remained beautiful even without all the maintenance, while you always described the state she actually got into after days of mud, outdoor camping, and not wanting to bathe in glacier-fed streams. I seem to recall that the dumpy girl was pregnant when she got back to the inn. Was she complaining? She'd been boosted from a non-speaking, practically invisible role to a fully-fledged secondary character. Her child starts off with a searching for my father plot, in which she's bound to have a major part in the first chapters at least. We each left a unique symbol, as it wasn't clear which of us. And we left enough money that her father wasn't upset one little bit. No matter. The vampire's name is Maunisa, but I suspect she'd change it if you asked. I think her original author wanted her to be beautiful, but couldn't quite carry off the description. She'd got all the right features, but they just added up to ordinary. I suppose I better meet her. But she sounds pretty promising. Well, promising, at least. And you reckon she's okay with technology? Oh, treats it as magic, as any medieval Central European would. But how many modern characters do any different? She's not terrified of it, anyway. He made a couple of gestures over the thick, brass-bound book that served him as computer interface, or grimoire. Unlike me, you mean? Perhaps we could class yours as informed caution? Your terror is an educated reaction to the very real dangers. Here we are. A magical fantasy author would say something like materialization. An SF one would mention the waft of displaced air, or the hologram-like shimmering. Actually, she was just there, as if she always had been. Morny, meet Rupert Denver. He's an author. Her face had indeed missed beauty by all the critical details, but the expression that lit it up almost compensated for them. A genuine author? And Bert wouldn't drag me out unless there's a real hope of a job. I could kiss you. Considering the hardly subtle set of fangs she'd sported, this was an interesting, if slightly disturbing prospect. Better read some of the stuff he's written first, girl. He's not everyone's taste. You'll never be a bestseller with him. He could write me stark naked in an alligator tank in front of a nightclub full of drooling voyeurs, and it would still be better than this grey non-existence. And he doesn't look like an alligator person. I'd have thought, I said, breaking in on their obviously well-matured friendship, that with the number of vampire rip-offs being written now, there'd have been no difficulty finding work. In those, I'd spend most of my time flashing these visual attributes. She gestured to her breasts, which were high, firm, and pointed. There'd have been enough to get her a film part in reality, but here in fiction, they were just typical. In central casting, find a character who can't get by without a bra. And firstly, she has to be quite outstanding, only not there. And secondly, she was written by a woman who she detests intensely. Of a damp face flannel, crucifix fodder, and maybe a paragraph's erotic interest. Not that I'm averse to erotic interest, you understand? I was written for it. But there has to be more in literature than sticking bits of one's being into another. Be they teeth, fingers? I'm sure he's understood, my dear. Bert had been written as Edwardian upper class and was actually blushing. Denver doesn't write body strippers, or at least he hasn't done so up to now. Sex, yes, but copulation offstage. Don't make promises for me, Albert. I seem to remember that in Last Night in La Scala, the copulation, where he'd managed to make the word sound natural, from me it was a mockery, was actually on stage, even if the audience weren't present. By now I knew, and Bert knew, and I suspect Monissa was fairly sure too, that we would be working together. But an interview should be longer than that, or the interviewee doesn't feel taken seriously. How did he, your author, explain away the kung fu elements, given your difficulties with running water? Her features had a trace of Mongol in them. Perhaps she'd attained vampirehood only after arriving in Europe. Huh? Him? He'd got a family of vampires running a camel caravan along the Silk Road. The robes protected them from the sun, and since it's desert, obviously no rivers or streams, don't you see? I suppose that since it's futuristic, my fighting skills are useless. Would you be my leading man if I were chosen? No, there's a standard leading man in this series. I'm his biographer, sidekick, his Dr. Watson. And you're on, if you still think you're desperate enough. I'm sure the kung fu will be useful once I've worked out how you can travel. Nothing's ever wasted, and it'll be great for the film version. Eh? Film? Moving pictures? You've heard of them? She shook her head, flung her arms round me, and gave me a kiss. The fangs didn't disturb at all, then bounced off to do the same to Bert, before returning to limbo. Slightly flustered, it's possible to embarrass him. I'd have thought things like that happened to him all the time. Bert shuffled some unnecessary papers for a few seconds. Now, bit parts, Bert continued. I've noticed they're queuing up to join you. You have a reputation for making sure they always have food and shelter, unlike a lot of authors. Do you have any special requirements? The conversation trailed off into technicalities I won't bore you with. Instead, I'll bore you with some details about me. I was written to be an author for first-person narrative by my creator. The guy who wrote me gave me permission to rewrite some of my own details. That is rare. Most authors, even me, are so proud of the words they've written, they wouldn't let an editor, let alone one of the characters they themselves have created, fiddle with them. That's how I've fixed up my bad knees, which gave me far more flexibility in horse riding cultures, and accepted weak ankles instead. Good, well-laced boots could compensate for them. But even more than this, he let me edit him. How many authors would have that much confidence in their creations? I didn't change him much, just a slight improvement in his eyesight so he could get around without spectacles, and a bit more depth and authority to his voice, which I took back out when we'd finished the editing. Tubby and unfit, he panted around the quest with us, unwilling to let his physical disadvantages slow the rest of us down, and his friends must have been quite surprised at his fitness afterwards. What would have happened had he died on the adventure? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. Many characters have lived on after their creators' deaths, and some have even had further adventures, but none, to my knowledge, have been responsible for that death. Anyway, my creator came out of the experience with new insight into what it meant to be a character, and better muscle tone, and lots of bruises. And no author can resist a new insight. Well, certainly I can't. I promise you, my fictional and probably imaginary reader and listener, that was less boring than our discussion as to how many secondary characters and how many zombies. We're not talking real zombies here, but ciphers, moving wallpaper, cut-out figures with no need for personalities I'd be needing to make my crowd scenes effective. Then we took a cup of virtual tea. I control-C'd the folder containing the new companions we wouldn't meet until I reached their part of the story, and close the central casting window. Now, I just need to get creative.